The congressman's daughter stepped into Judge Judy's courtroom as if she owned the place. Her chin stayed lifted, her heels struck the floor with sharp precision, and her confidence rang louder than the truth she was trying to conceal. For a moment she believed her family name could tilt everything in her favor. But when the proof began closing in, when her story started to unravel in front of everyone, fear crept in. In a sudden burst of desperation, she crossed a line no one expected. She called 911 on Judge Judy herself. Half a minute later, reality hit her hard. She had just triggered her own collapse. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted the instant she entered, the way a space subtly rearranges itself around someone who assumes they belong above it. Her heels echoed like deliberate signals, each step announcing her presence as if all eyes and cameras were meant for her alone. A few people in the gallery whispered, others leaned forward, curious. Judge Judy remained still, watching without a flicker of reaction. The young woman carried herself with rehearsed poise head high, shoulders squared, eyes gleaming with the kind of confidence built in environments where consequences rarely linger. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, smiled faintly, then glanced toward a nearby camera, not to document the moment but to be acknowledged by it. Across the room, the plaintiff stood quietly at a modest wooden stand. A neatly folded bakery apron rested over her arm, slightly worn but clean. Her hands gripped a thick folder of documents so tightly the edges pressed into her skin. Yet she didn't loosen her hold. She stood there, tense and silent, as though those papers were the only thing keeping her steady. Judge Judy allowed the silence to stretch just long enough for the defendant's confidence to feel misplaced. Then she spoke, calm and controlled. "Let's begin." The congressman's daughter didn't answer. Instead, she raised an eyebrow with mild amusement and shifted her stance, as if expecting special treatment. Perhaps a chair, perhaps admiration. Instead, the clerk read out the case number, the sharp sound cutting through her imagined spotlight. The plaintiff finally looked up, briefly meeting the judge's eyes before lowering her gaze again. Her breathing faltered slightly, almost inaudible beneath the faint rustling of paperwork nearby. But Judge Judy noticed. She always noticed the quiet ones, the ones who came for fairness, not attention. When the defendant approached the podium, she did so with exaggerated reluctance, as though every step was beneath her. She tossed her hair back and looked at the plaintiff with a faint, dismissive smile. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I shouldn't even be here." Judge Judy tilted her head slightly, a small movement that carried unmistakable authority. "You are here," she replied, "so let's find out why." The young woman opened her mouth again, ready to control the narrative, ready to perform. But she had no idea that the confidence she walked in with would not last long. As her hand settled on the podium, Judge Judy leaned forward just a fraction, a subtle motion that made the entire room grow more attentive. Sensing a shift, the defendant let out a dramatic sigh before taking her stance, her presence loud and deliberate. Her heels tapped against the floor as if the courtroom itself owed her acknowledgement. Her smile sharpened, turning the space into what she seemed to think was a personal stage. One manicured hand rested on the podium, while her nails tapped impatiently, like someone waiting for service rather than standing in court. Her gaze swept across the room with the assurance of someone used to admiration instead of accountability. She flicked her hair back again, each motion calculated and controlled. Judge Judy remained still, unshaken. "This entire situation is absurd," the defendant said, rolling her eyes. "It's just a bakery, a small one. I barely did anything." Her tone carried irritation, the kind that comes from someone who sees inconvenience as an offense. The plaintiff stood quietly beside her podium, clutching her folder tightly, her hands pressing into the papers as if trying to contain her nerves. She tried to speak but hesitated, her shoulders tensing as the defendant let out a dismissive laugh. Judge Judy turned her focus back to the defendant. "Start with your version of events," she said. "Tell me what happened." The defendant exhaled loudly, dragging out the moment. "Fine," she said. "I went into a bakery to order a custom cake for an event. She refused to give me a discount, which honestly was rude considering who my father is. Then she accused me of knocking something over. I wasn't even near the shelf." She gestured dismissively as if brushing the accusation aside. She's clearly exaggerating for attention. The plaintiff's breath caught a flicker of hurt crossing her face. Judge Judy responded evenly. "Your father's position is irrelevant here." The defendant scoffed. "Maybe not to you." A ripple moved through the room. Even the bailiff adjusted his stance slightly, his expression tightening. The plaintiff lowered her gaze again, shrinking under the weight of the defendant's confidence. Judge Judy leaned forward just slightly, enough to shift the entire tone of the room. "Do not misunderstand me," she said firmly. "You are in my courtroom. Your father is not." For the first time, the defendant's expression faltered. She quickly mastered, crossing her arms in an attempt to regain control. "Look," she said, "I don't even want to be here. My schedule is packed. My time matters. I have events, meetings, people waiting on me." The judge's eyes tightened just a fraction. "Your time isn't worth more than hers," she said, gesturing toward the plaintiff. "And both of you are standing here today because something took place. Something we're going to address truthfully." A faint crack appeared in the defendant's polished composure. Her jaw clenched, just enough to reveal the first sign of strain beneath her confident exterior. She started to respond, ready to argue again, but the courtroom door shut with a distinct click as someone entered, pulling every gaze toward the back in an instant. A folder was placed on Judge Judy's desk with a soft thud. The sound wasn't loud, but it sliced through the room with quiet authority. The defendant's smile stalled mid-expression. Judge Judy didn't open it right away. She let it sit there, untouched, like a truth waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The plaintiff held her breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, stiff and unmoving, as if even the slightest tremor might weaken her case. When the judge finally opened the folder, the papers shifted softly, like hushed voices carrying weight. She turned one page, then another, scanning quickly and with precision. A low murmur began to ripple through the audience, the kind that rises when something is changing, even if no one can yet explain how. The congressman's daughter leaned forward abruptly. "Those are fake," she said, her voice sharp and sudden. "Whatever she brought, it's edited. Anyone can fake images now." Judge Judy continued reading, unbothered. "I'm serious," the defendant insisted, her tone climbing. "She probably pulled those off the internet. This whole thing is staged." Only then did Judge Judy look up, her gaze cutting through the room. "I haven't said a word," she replied calmly. "You're interrupting yourself." The defendant blinked, thrown off by the quiet control in the judge's voice. The plaintiff stepped forward carefully and placed another photograph on the bench. Her fingers brushed the surface for a moment before she pulled back, as if even that brief contact carried weight. The image showed a broken wooden shelf collapsed under shattered ceramic pieces, with a shadow stretching across the floor, one that clearly resembled the defendant. Judge Judy examined it, then asked plainly, "Are you saying you were nowhere near this shelf?" The defendant let out a short, hollow laugh. "Obviously not. I already told you that." Judge Judy raised her hand, and silence fell instantly. She flipped another page in the folder, pausing at a printed receipt before lifting her eyes toward the plaintiff. "You included a timestamp," she noted quietly, "and a witness statement." The defendant rolled her eyes. Witnesses lie. They like attention. Judge Judy tapped the timestamp with a finger tap, 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 a steady rhythm that tightened the atmosphere in the room. "This timestamp," she said, "doesn't come from the plaintiff. It comes from the store's security system." The defendant's expression froze. "And it shows you walking directly toward that shelf less than 30 seconds before it collapsed." A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. The defendant's lips parted, but no words followed. The confident smile she had worn like armor flickered. Judge Judy lifted another photograph, still not speaking immediately. She held it in silence, and that silence stretched long enough to make the defendant shift uncomfortably. She crossed her arms, then uncrossed them, then placed a hand on her hip, as if changing her posture might somehow change reality. Finally, Judge Judy looked up. "What time did you say you left the bakery?" The defendant blinked. "I already said I left at 4:20. I had an event at 5. I couldn't have been there any later." Judge Judy nodded slowly. 4:20. She turned the photo outward, first toward the room, then toward the defendant. This image was taken at 4:42. A wave of reaction moved across the courtroom. The plaintiff's breath caught slightly, but she stayed silent, lowering her eyes as if afraid to disturb the fragile moment holding everything together. The defendant forced a tight smile. "That has to be wrong. Maybe their system clock is off. Maybe her staff made a mistake. They always mess things up. Judge Judy raised a single eyebrow. The timestamp is connected to a cloud-based security system. It doesn't drift, it doesn't guess, and it doesn't lie. The defendant swallowed, her throat moving visibly. And, Judge Judy added, tapping the image once, the person in this photo is wearing the same jacket you have on today. The defendant's breath caught. She glanced down at her blazer, the pale lavender fabric now standing out under the courtroom lights like evidence she couldn't escape. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Judge Judy opened the folder again and turned to another page of witness statement the plaintiff hadn't mentioned. Holding it up slightly, she said, "You didn't tell me there were 2 witnesses." The plaintiff looked surprised. I only brought one statement. The other employee wasn't sure she wanted to get involved." "She was," Judge Judy said evenly. She sent her statement directly to the court this morning. The defendant snapped her head toward the plaintiff. "You told her to do that. You're manipulating people now." "No," Judge Judy interrupted flatly. "People tend to tell the truth when they believe no one is watching." The defendant stood frozen, her composure breaking from within. "And this witness," Judge Judy continued, "states that you argued with her about paying for the damage after the shelf fell. That was the moment everything shifted. The illusion she carried into the courtroom shattered completely, just as quietly and completely as the broken ceramics in the photograph." As Judge Judy slid the witness statement across the bench, she delivered a single sentence that made the defendant recoil as if it stung. "Now we can start telling the truth." The defendant's breath caught just once, but in a courtroom this still once was more than enough. Confidence begins to sound different when it cracks under pressure. It shifts from bold to fragile. The congressman's daughter adjusted her blazer, lifting her chin as though she could force herself back into control. But control has a certain presence, and she had already lost it. Her gaze darted between the statement, the plaintiff, and Judge Judy, searching desperately for an opening, some flaw she could use. "There wasn't anything," she said, clearing her throat. "This is absurd." But the words lacked conviction, as if she no longer believed what she was saying. Judge Judy remained unmoved. She folded her hands slowly, deliberately, a quiet signal that she wasn't rushing. That calm patience was far more intimidating than anger. "You said you left at 4:20, Judy began. "There's evidence placing you there at 4:42. There's also witness stating you argued about the damages afterward." The defendant's foot began tapping rapidly against the floor, betraying her nerves. "I was upset," she snapped. "Anyone would be. They all knew who I was. They were overreacting on purpose. People do that around important families." A low murmur spread through the room, filled with disbelief. "Important families," Judge Judy repeated evenly, as if weighing the phrase. "Is that your explanation?" "It's the truth," the defendant replied sharply. "People exaggerate when politicians are involved. They want attention. They want drama." She probably loved the idea of this going viral. The plaintiff looked up, startled, her eyes wide, not with anger, but hurt. Judge Judy leaned back slightly. "We believe this is happening to you," she said, "not because of your actions, but because of who your father is." The defendant nodded quickly, too quickly. "That's interesting," Judy said, "because until now the only person who has mentioned your father is you." The defendant blinked, caught off guard. "The plaintiff never brought him up. The witnesses didn't mention him either," Judy continued. "The only person putting your father on trial here is you." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand. The press. There is no press here," Judge Judy interrupted calmly. "Only accountability." The defendant's breathing grew uneven. She suddenly turned toward the plaintiff. "You did this," she said sharply. "You told people who I am. You wanted attention." The plaintiff flinched. "I didn't," she said softly. "I just wanted you to pay for what you broke." That simple statement carried more weight than anything else said that day. The defendant turned back toward Judge Judy, her eyes widening as the room seemed to close in around her. The attention she once welcomed now felt suffocating. Her voice faltered. "You're twisting everything." "No," Judge Judy replied evenly. The only person twisting anything here is you." Just as the defendant tried to fire back again, the bailiff stepped forward, one calm, controlled step that shifted the entire atmosphere. Then she made a mistake. She pointed directly at the judge. The room seemed to recoil. Her finger hung in the air between them like a spark in dry air, small, reckless, but dangerous enough to ignite something she couldn't control. Her breathing quickened, sharp and uneven. The composed voice she entered with was gone, replaced by something strained and breaking. "This is unfair," she said loudly. "You're not even listening. You're taking her side just because she looks emotional and I don't." The plaintiff froze. She wasn't crying, she was holding everything in, the way quiet people do when they've been overlooked too many times. Judge Judy stayed still at first, that same heavy, deliberate stillness. "Put your hand down," she said finally, her voice low but commanding enough to draw everyone's focus. The defendant hesitated but didn't lower it. Instead, she pushed further. "You think you can talk to me like that? You're supposed to be." The bailiff took another step forward. Not aggressive, just firm, steady, unmoved by status or name. The defendant's words faltered mid-sentence. Then Judge Judy stood, not abruptly, not with anger. Slowly, deliberately, the kind of movement that carries authority without needing volume. The defendant instinctively stepped back. "One," Judy said, raising a finger. "You do not point at me." A second finger lifted. "Two, you do not raise your voice at me." A third followed. "Three, you do not accuse this courtroom of bias simply because the truth does not favor you." The defendant swallowed hard. Her confidence was slipping fast. I was just." Judge Judy cut her off with a single look. The plaintiff, summoning what courage she had left, stepped forward and gently placed the final photograph on the bench, the one she had been holding back for the moment when truth mattered more than fear. The image captured the defendant standing directly in front of the broken shelf, her hand extended, frozen in the split second before impact. A collective gasp filled the room. The color drained from the defendant's face. "That's fake," she shouted, her voice too sharp, too frantic to sound convincing. "It's taken from the live security feed," the plaintiff replied quietly. "I asked for a still image from the footage." The defendant slammed her hand against the podium, the sound cracking through the courtroom like a warning shot. Judge Judy narrowed her eyes. "Stop." That single word froze everything. Then, like a final spark dropped onto fuel, the defendant muttered, "This is harassment." Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering into something calm but cutting. "If you believe this is harassment," she said, "then you're moments away from understanding what real consequences look like." The defendant's breathing shifted, unveiled, shallow, unsteady. Anger can only mask fear for so long, and now her fear was beginning to show. She stood stiffly at the podium, chest rising too fast, her eyes darting between the judge, the plaintiff, and the bailiff, as if searching for an escape route. But there wasn't one, only the truth, closing in. Her fingers tightened round the edge of the podium, knuckles turning pale. "I'm being targeted," she said, her voice trembling beneath forced confidence. "You all know it. You're just pretending not to see it." Judge Judy remained seated, yet her presence filled the entire room. "What I see," she said evenly, "is someone refusing to take responsibility." "You're twisting everything," the defendant snapped. "All of you are. I didn't do anything wrong, and you're making me look like a criminal." "This is a civil case," Judge Judy replied calmly. "No one is calling you a criminal." But panic doesn't listen to reason. The defendant stepped back from the podium as if distance could erase evidence. Then she turned suddenly toward the courtroom door. "I'm leaving," she declared. "I don't feel safe here." The words sounded rehearsed, like something she had repeated to herself in her own head. But her voice cracked midway, exposing the fear underneath. The bailiff stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to block her path. Solid, calm, unmoving. "You need to remain in the courtroom, ma'am," he said quietly. She froze, her throat tightening. Her gaze shifted between the bailiff and Judge Judy's steady expression. "You can't keep me here," she whispered. "You entered willingly," Judge Judy responded, "and you will remain until this matter is resolved." At her podium, the plaintiff stood with her hands clasped tightly. She said nothing. But her eyes followed the defendant's unraveling, caught somewhere between fear and relief. She had lived under this woman's shadow before. She had no desire to return to it. "You think you can trap me?" the defendant said, her voice breaking despite her effort to hide it. "You think you can humiliate me because of who my father is?" "No," Judge Judy replied softly. "You're doing that to yourself." The defendant's breath caught again. A tremor ran through her hands. "I'm calling someone," she murmured, almost to herself. She reached into her purse. The room stiffened. The plaintiff tensed. Even the bailiff leaned slightly forward. Judge Judy didn't move. That same sharp stillness returned, the kind that meant she already understood what was about to happen. And she knew it wouldn't end well. The defendant pulled out her phone, desperation flashing across her face like lightning before a storm. Slowly, deliberately, she raised it. 3 taps. 9. 1. 1. Each touch against the screen sounded louder than it should have, echoing through the silent courtroom. Everything stopped. She lifted the phone to her ear, chin raised, shoulders square, trying to reclaim the confidence that had been slipping away piece by piece. But confidence built on panic is fragile, and everyone could see it cracking. The line began to ring. Judge Judy didn't look away. She stood completely still, watching a young woman walk straight into her own downfall with the certainty of someone who had never been stopped before. "I'm calling to report an emergency," the defendant announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I'm being illegally detained inside Judge Judy's courtroom. They're refusing to let me leave. I feel unsafe." A wave of murmurs spread through the audience, shock, disbelief, and something close to tension. Then a voice answered on the line. 911. "What is your emergency?" The defendant inhaled sharply, switching into a polished, rehearsed tone, the kind shaped by growing up around power and microphones. "Yes," she said. "I am the daughter of Congressman Tyler Anderson. I'm being held here against my will by Judge Judy and her staff. I need immediate assistance." Judge Judy stepped forward, not abruptly, not loudly, just enough to shift the air in the room. "This is Judge Judith Shendlin," she said, her voice calm but cutting cleanly through the panic. "We have a caller attempting to file a false emergency report." The defendant spun toward her, eyes wide. "You can't." "But she could." The dispatcher's tone changed immediately, sharper now, more alert. "Ma'am, are you in danger?" Judge Judy answered, not the defendant. "No," she said firmly. "She is in a lawful courtroom proceeding. She is free to leave once this case is finished. She is not being detained, and she is not in danger. What she is doing is misusing emergency services." The defendant's face went pale. "Wait, no, that's not true. She's twisting everything," she stammered. The bailiff stepped in closer, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, filing a false emergency report is a criminal offense." There it was. Her grip on the phone weakened. Her breath caught mid-chest. For the first time, real fear showed, not of the judge, not of the plaintiff, but of something far greater. Consequences that couldn't be avoided with status or volume. The dispatcher's voice returned, colder now. "Mom, if you are not in immediate danger, this call should end. Do you understand the legal consequences of making a false report?" Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Judge Judy crossed her arms. "Hang up," she said quietly. "No." The defendant slowly lowered the phone, her fingers trembling. The screen dimmed as the call ended, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and unforgiving. When she set the phone down on the podium, her entire body shook, like a storm barely being held together. "You've just made this far more serious than it needed to be," Judge Judy said evenly. The call was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Silence settled over the courtroom like a weight, and within that silence the defendant finally felt something real. Fear. The phone slipped slightly in her hand before she placed it face down, as if she didn't want anyone to see it anymore. Her shoulders folded inward, no longer held back with rehearsed confidence. She stared down at her hands, blinking rapidly, beginning to understand what she had done. This wasn't in front of her father. Not in front of powerful allies. Not in front of people who could fix things. This time, she was alone. Judge Judy turned slightly toward the bailiff. "Keep the line documented," she said. "Make sure the record of that call remains active." The defendant's head snapped up. Panic flashed across her face. "Wait, why? I hung up." "It's over." Judge Judy shook her head slowly. Panic doesn't erase evidence. Even the bailiff seemed to absorb the weight of her words. He picked up the courtroom phone and contacted the dispatcher again, calmly confirming the situation so the report would be officially recorded. False emergency call. Courtroom. Caller identified. Each word landed like a blow. The defendant stepped back, bumping into the podium. "I didn't lie," she said, her voice shaking. "I felt unsafe. I was overwhelmed. All of you made me feel." "You felt cornered by the truth," Judge Judy interrupted. "That is not the same as being in danger." The plaintiff stood quietly, watching. Her expression softened, not out of sympathy but recognition. Fear had lived in her bakery for weeks after the incident. Now she was watching the person who caused it come apart in the same way. The defendant shook her head quickly. "No, you're twisting it again. I didn't mean to cause problems. I was scared. I didn't know what else to do. You can't punish me for a mistake." Judge Judy folded her hands together. "A mistake is dropping your phone. A mistake is misplacing a receipt. This was a choice." The defendant's breath caught. "My father will, your father," Judge Judy cut in sharply, "has nothing to do with this courtroom." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried more weight than shouting ever could. For the first time, the defendant seemed smaller, not physically but emotionally, like a shadow shrinking under direct light. Her eyes filled with panic she could no longer hide. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, unable to form the words she needed. "This will follow you," Judge Judy added quietly, "not because I'm being harsh, but because actions carry consequences." Her voice broke on the next breath. I didn't think it would go this far." "It always does," Judge Judy replied, "when someone believes they're untouchable." The bailiff returned to his position. The room fell into a deep, suffocating stillness, and just when it seemed like everything had already landed, the defendant's phone vibrated sharply against the podium. The sudden sound cut through the silence like a warning. A single message lit up the screen, and whatever color remained in her face disappeared completely. The vibration echoed again. One message. One line. And whatever confidence she had left was gone. She stared at the glowing screen as if it were a final judgment. Her hand hovered over it, shaking, unsure whether to silence it or throw it away. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Her breathing faltered. Control slipped through her fingers like sand. Judge Judy watched her steadily, unblinking. "You can read it," she said. "It won't change the truth." The defendant swallowed hard and turned the phone over. For a brief moment, the brightness of the screen was visible to everyone before she pulled it close to her chest. But she couldn't hide the way her knees trembled, or the way her breath broke as she exhaled. It's nothing," she murmured quietly. "Just someone checking on me." Judge Judy's gaze grew sharper. Someone or something? A thin, fragile silence filled the room, the kind that revealed more than any explanation ever could. The plaintiff shifted slightly forward, a flicker of concern in her eyes. Not sympathy, but a careful sense of humanity. Judy noticed the movement and gave a subtle nod, allowing the moment to breathe. Then she reopened the folder. "Let's go back to the facts," she said, her tone steady. Each word landed with purpose, guiding the situation deeper into consequences that could no longer be avoided. She began presenting receipts, timelines, and photographs, each item placed with precise intent. The defendant's eyes moved quickly from one document to another, her composure unraveling with every page. "You misrepresented the time," Judy stated. "You misrepresented your position, and you misrepresented feeling threatened." The defendant's hands were visibly shaking now, her nails tapping faintly against the podium. I didn't mean to lie," she stammered. "I was overwhelmed. I was trying to explain the cameras, the statements. It felt like everything was being twisted." "No," Judy replied evenly. "For the first time, everything is simply being seen clearly." A small, broken sound escaped the defendant's throat, somewhere between a breath and a sob she tried to suppress. She pressed her palm against the podium for balance, but it only made her trembling more obvious. The plaintiff slowly released her clasped hands, letting them fall at her sides. She looked at the defendant with a mix of caution and quiet understanding. She knew what it felt like to come apart like this. She had lived through the fear this woman had caused. Judy turned her attention to the plaintiff. "Tell me again," she said gently. "What happened after the shelf fell?" The plaintiff spoke in a low but steady voice. "She got angry. She said we would regret it. She said her father would—" "Stop," the defendant blurted, her voice cracking. "Stop bringing him into this." Judy tilted her head slightly. "You introduced him into this situation." The defendant's eyes filled with tears, glistening under the harsh courtroom lights. Her mascara clung to her lashes as if it too was struggling to hold together. Her shoulders sank, her voice weakened, her confidence slipping. I didn't want to look wrong," she whispered. "I didn't want people to think I was like this." The courtroom grew painfully quiet. For the first time, she sounded real. As she lowered her head, a quiet admission began to form. Judge Judy leaned forward, recognizing the moment when truth finally begins to surface. Her lips trembled, ready to speak honestly at last. But truth carries weight, and when it came out, it wasn't smooth, it was fractured. The defendant gripped the podium tightly, her knuckles turning pale. The room held its breath, heavy and still, as if bracing for a confession that had been fighting to emerge since she first walked in. Judge Judy leaned in slightly, her voice calm but cutting. "What were you actually doing in that bakery?" A long pause followed, the kind that changes everything in the room. The defendant swallowed, glancing at the plaintiff, then down at the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice broke midway. I wasn't there for a cake." A ripple of quiet shock moved through the room. The plaintiff's eyes widened, her breath catching as the meaning settled in. Judy remained completely still. "Then why were you there?" she asked. The defendant slowly lifted her gaze, fear, shame, and raw vulnerability flickering behind her eyes. "Because an employee posted something online about my father, something ugly, something people were sharing." She inhaled shakily. "He told me to ignore it. I couldn't." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I went there to confront her." A wave of disbelief spread through the courtroom. The plaintiff froze slightly, remembering the way the defendant had stormed in that day, angry, entitled, unpredictable. Judge Judy's expression hardened, though her tone stayed controlled. "You confronted her over a personal issue inside her workplace." The defendant nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I thought if I showed her who she was dealing with, she'd take it down. I thought it would fix everything. I thought I could protect him." Her voice cracked again. "My father says he doesn't care what people say, but I do, because they blame him for everything. They blame us." Her chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. The courtroom had never heard her speak without defenses until now. "I was desperate," she admitted. "I was tired of the hate, the comments, the threats, the jokes, everything. I just wanted it to stop." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of smeared mascara. "And when things fell off the shelf, I panicked. I thought admitting it would make him look weak. So I lied, and then I kept lying." The plaintiff softened slightly, recognizing pain even when it came wrapped in privilege. Judge Judy exhaled slowly, a measured breath carrying both authority and understanding. "Your father is not on trial here," she said. "But you have been taking the pressure you feel at home and placing it on this young woman." The defendant blinked rapidly, overwhelmed, as the weight of everything finally settled in. She could no longer deny it. "And you tried to turn a 911 call into a weapon," Judy continued. "Not because you were in danger, but because you were overwhelmed with guilt." A tear slipped down the defendant's cheek, and this time she didn't wipe it away. The room sat in stunned silence, absorbing the shift, the emotional turn that changed how everything was understood. "I never meant to hurt anyone," the defendant said softly. "I just didn't want to feel powerless." Judge Judy gave a small nod. "Feeling powerless doesn't give you permission to take power from someone else." The defendant lowered her gaze. For the first time, she looked like someone ready to hear the truth. As her confession settled into the space, Judge Judy lightly tapped her gavel. "Now we address the harm you've caused, both what can be seen and what cannot." The admission lingered in the air like dust after something had shattered. No one moved. No one spoke. It was the quiet that follows a breaking point. The defendant stood at the podium, shoulders drawn inward, mascara faintly smeared beneath her eyes. She no longer looked like a powerful politician's daughter, but like a young woman who had run out of ways to hide. Her fingers shook slightly against the polished surface, yet she didn't pull them back. She didn't try to rebuild the confidence she had carried into the courtroom. Judge Judy observed her calmly, her expression steady and unreadable, not harsh, not sympathetic, just grounded. There is a certain stillness that follows honesty, and Judy understood that no decision should come before that weight is fully felt. "Take a breath," she said quietly. The defendant inhaled shakily, almost as if the act surprised her. She wiped her face again, slower this time, the panic fading into something quieter, perhaps exhaustion or realization. The plaintiff stepped forward, gripping the edges of her apron as if gathering strength. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she continued. "You frightened my staff," she said, "not because of your father or politics, but because you came in angry and loud, and they didn't know what you might do." The defendant's face crumpled as she looked down. "I didn't mean, I know," the plaintiff said gently. "But it still happened." The courtroom returned to silence, but this time it felt different, not tense, not sharp, just deeply human. Judge Judy leaned back slightly, allowing both women a moment to breathe. For the first time, she saw the defendant not as someone entitled and aggressive, but as someone weighed down by expectations she couldn't meet and emotions she didn't fully understand. But understanding is not forgiveness, and her expression made that clear. "You acted out of fear," Judy said. "Fear for your father, fear of judgment, fear of losing control." She tapped the folder lightly. "But fear doesn't undo harm. It doesn't repair what's been damaged." The defendant nodded slowly, tears clinging to her lashes. "I understand." "And the bakery owner," Judy continued, "has been living with the consequences of your actions for weeks." The plaintiff's voice trembled again, not from weakness, but from relief at finally being heard. "I just wanted an apology," she said softly, "and for you to understand what you did." The defendant exhaled unevenly. "I do. I really do." For a brief moment, the courtroom felt suspended between two states, the damage already done and the possibility of healing. Judge Judy closed the folder with a firm, decisive sound. "Understanding is only the beginning," she said. "Accountability requires more." The defendant straightened slightly, bracing herself. The storm had passed, but what came after still needed to be faced. As Judy leaned forward, preparing to explain what would happen next, a sudden knock echoed through the courtroom door, pulling everyone's attention toward it. The sound faded, but its presence lingered. Sudden interruptions do that in quiet rooms. They remind everyone how fragile calm can be. The bailiff opened the door slightly, exchanged a few quiet words, then shut it again with a soft click. There was no threat, no media, just a clerk delivering paperwork. Still, the brief disruption had already unsettled the defendant, making her fragile composure feel even more delicate. Judge Judy waited until all eyes returned to her. Then she folded her hands on the desk, her posture calm but unmistakably firm. "We're going to continue," she said, "because the truth doesn't pause for interruptions." The defendant gave a small nod, though her chin quivered. She drew in an unsteady breath, brushing away the last traces of tears from her cheeks. Her voice came out fragile, worn down by everything that had just happened. "I meant what I said," she murmured. "I truly didn't want to hurt anyone." Judy tilted her head slightly. "But you did." The words landed heavily, and the defendant flinched as if she could feel their weight. Plain truth always carried that kind of force. The plaintiff held her hands together in front of her, a protective gesture, but no longer one rooted in fear. She had watched the defendant fall apart, admit the truth, and begin to soften. Now she was witnessing someone trying to rebuild in real time. The defendant glanced toward her. "I'm sorry," she said. The apology sounded uneven, unfamiliar. "I know it feels small compared to everything that happened, but I mean it." The plaintiff gave a single nod, genuine but careful. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the bench. "You're apologizing because you were confronted," she said, "but also because you recognized the truth beneath your panic. That's a beginning." The defendant swallowed hard. I've always been taught to stand firm. Never admit fault. Never let anything make us seem weak. Her voice cracked again. I thought apologizing would only make things worse. Apologies, Judy said calmly, are not weakness. They are accountability. The defendant's shoulders dropped, the tension finally draining out of them. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together in a small, almost childlike motion. I've never felt this ashamed, she whispered. Not like this. It isn't shame, Judy corrected gently. It's awareness, and it's long overdue. A soft murmur moved through the courtroom, a mix of agreement and quiet empathy. Even the defendant seemed taken aback by the sense of relief that followed those words, as if awareness was something she had needed without realizing it. The plaintiff exhaled slowly. I don't want your life destroyed, she said. I just wanted the truth. The defendant's eyes filled again. I know. Judge Judy nodded. Good, because recognizing the harm is only the first step. The next is making it right. The defendant straightened slightly, not with confidence, but with intention. A faint sense of resolve replaced the panic. What do I need to do? She asked. There was no defiance left in her voice, only acceptance. Judy opened the folder again, prepared to outline the consequences, real ones this time, not avoided or imagined. Before she could speak, the plaintiff slowly raised her hand. The movement was small, but it stilled the entire courtroom. Even Judge Judy paused. When the plaintiff finally spoke, her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she continued. Judge, before you decide anything, I'd like to say something. She turned toward the defendant, not with anger or fear, but with a quiet courage. The defendant looked up, surprised. She quickly wiped her face, still unsettled by her own vulnerability. You want to talk to me? She asked softly. I want to understand, the plaintiff replied. You said you were under pressure, that people online were attacking your father. But when you came into my bakery, you were so angry, so intense. Why me? The defendant swallowed, her voice thin. Because you were the closest connection to the post. You worked with the employee who wrote it. And when I saw you behind the counter, she shook her head, shame pulling at her expression. I put everything onto you. I was angry. And you were just there. The plaintiff blinked slowly, absorbing the answer. I never wanted to be part of your family's problems. I just run a bakery. A delicate silence followed, two young women standing at the intersection of fear, privilege, and consequences neither had planned. Judge Judy allowed the moment to linger. The light above the bench cast long shadows across the polished floor, as if even the past was being pulled into the open. The defendant spoke again, quieter now. Every time something happens online or in the news, people assume I'm just like him. The comments get cruel. The threats get worse. Her voice broke. I just wanted to feel powerful for once. I wanted someone to listen to me. And instead, Judy said gently, you hurt someone who had nothing to do with the pain you were carrying. The defendant nodded, tears returning. I know. The plaintiff let out a slow breath. I don't want revenge, she said softly. I never did. I just wanted the truth to matter. Judge Judy leaned back, observing both of them, the plaintiff steady and quiet dignity, the defendant fragile in her realization. The room held a rare stillness, a shared moment of humanity. This, Judy said softly, is what reflection looks like, not excuses, not avoidance. Understanding. She closed the folder with calm finality, the sound echoing like the end of a chapter. In this courtroom, she continued, accountability is not about humiliation. It is about recognition. She paused briefly, her gaze shifting toward the defendant. And once responsibility is acknowledged, it must be met with consequence. The defendant steadied herself, drawing in one final shaky breath. The plaintiff looked down quietly, preparing herself for closure, whatever form it would take. The entire courtroom leaned in. Just as Judge Judy raised her gavel to deliver the ruling, the defendant spoke under her breath. Whatever you decide, I will accept it. It was quiet, unexpected, strict of defense, and it shifted the atmosphere one last time. Judge Judy paused. Do you believe accountability can come from remorse alone, or must it always be followed by consequence? The gavel remained raised, suspended in stillness, holding the entire room in place. Then, instead of striking it, she gently lowered it back onto the bench. A deliberate choice. Her eyes moved slowly from the plaintiff to the defendant, and then to the space between them, that invisible line shaped by harm, privilege, fear, and truth, finally exposed. Both of you, she said softly, have stood here exposed, one through courage, one through consequence. The defendant wiped her cheeks again, this time not hiding it. Her posture shifted forward slightly, not in defiance, but in acceptance. Judge Judy began her ruling. To the plaintiff, you are entitled to compensation. The cost of repairs, lost inventory, and business disruption will be fully covered by the defendant. The plaintiff nodded as relief washed over her face. Not victory, not revenge, but release. Second, Judy continued, you will provide a formal written apology. Not edited, not influenced, not shaped by anyone else, your own words. It will be delivered both in writing and in person. The defendant's throat tightened. She nodded. Yes, I understand, but there is more. Her tone deepened. What occurred here was not only property damage. It involved misuse of emergency services, an attempt to distort reality, and behavior that placed others at risk. The defendant's eyes welled again, but she didn't look away. For that reason, the false emergency call will be formally recorded and referred to the appropriate authorities. Her voice remained steady, measured, humane but firm. This is part of understanding the full impact of your actions. The defendant inhaled sharply. I understand, and I will face it. Judy's expression softened slightly. Good, because accountability without acceptance is incomplete, and you are finally beginning to accept it. A heavy calm settled across the courtroom, not fear, not tension, but something quieter. Final. Necessary. Then she turned to the plaintiff. And you, she said gently, showed remarkable restraint and integrity. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet endurance. You embodied that today. The plaintiff's eyes softened with gratitude. Judge Judy straightened and raised the gavel once more. The defendant lowered her gaze. The plaintiff stood steady. The entire room held its breath. Let this serve as a reminder, she said, that power is not protection. Truth is not optional. And arrogance, her gaze briefly settled on the defendant, always collapses under the weight of its own echo. The gavel fell. Clean. Final. The room exhaled all at once. The defendant closed her eyes, letting the judgment settle fully into her. The plaintiff held her folder tighter, feeling a quiet sense of stability return, and Judge Judy remained still, composed as the truth of the moment settled where it belonged. You were just digging yourself deeper.